Hello, this is Rocky Marciano. When I was heavyweight champion of the world, they called me the Brockton Blockbuster. You find out why.
Rocky Marciano officially turned professional in 1948 under the direction of Al Weill. However, shortly after his erstwhile manager found himself re-employed as a matchmaker at the prestigious Madison Square Garden in New York. The rules forbidding the holder of such a role from directly managing a fighter meant Al turning over official duties to his stepson, Marty. Marty's role in the career of his new charge, who he officially managed from late 1948 until 1952, has remained in the shadows. Yet in 1964, he would speak to sports writer Ernie Salvatore for a 4-part serialized memoir in Boxing and Wrestling magazine. Here is the first part of that piece of storytelling, and yes, that term is used openly, for as John will briefly show after his reading, there is slightly more fiction than fact, at least in the first part.
I Remember Rocky by Marty Weill, as told to Ernie Salvatore. Exclusive first of a 4-part series, from Boxing and Wrestling magazine, 1964. You should have seen Rocky Marciano when he first reported to the gym. He was anything but a fighter. He didn't even look like one. Marty Weill. The first time I saw Rocky Marciano, then just plain Rocco Marciano of Brockton, Mass., was in Pete Mello's gym on 17th Street in New York. Rocky had black bushy hair, a lean, hard, hungry face and a stocky, muscular frame. He was wearing a plain zip-up jacket, slacks and heavy work shoes. With him was a thin, good-looking guy about the same age. He was Ali Colombo, a hometown buddy. Ali was dressed about the same as Rocky and looked about as hungry. The thing that impressed me and my dad, Al Weill, the most about these fellows were the anxious, eager looks they had in their eyes. Ambition, in other words, was spilling out of them. Rocky had come to New York seeking a tryout with Pop. Ali, who had worked with Rocky in the amateurs around Brockton, Providence and Boston, had written to him asking for the chance. Rocky's record in the amateurs was awfully impressive, and most reports about him from other sources were excellent. His only amateur defeat had come in the Eastern Golden Gloves. It was a decision loss to Coley Wallace, then being touted as the new Joe Louis. Few people who saw the fight, however, thought Wallace had won. But all of this was in the amateurs. The pros were something else again. After some brief, routine instructions, Charlie Goldman, my pop's little trainer with a black derby and cigar, told Marciano to get into his fighting togs. Or, rather ours, he didn't own any. When Rocky emerged from the dressing room a few minutes later, he looked like anything but a fighter. He was 23 years old, and that's a little old to start a pro career in boxing or any other sport. He was physically small, standing only 5'10½". That would have been okay had he weighed 145 or 155, but Rocky weighed in as a heavyweight. Now, all of this made him short on height, reach and experience, but long on years. Not a very promising set of circumstances. This tryout, the three of us figured would end in a hurry. Charlie told Rocky to first work with the speed bag, then the heavy bag. We wanted to see what he knew about the basic mechanics of our trade. It didn't take us long. For a fellow who had been such a successful amateur, we were amazed to see how little he knew. I can still see Pop and little Charlie looking at each other sideways, so as not to embarrass Rocky. Their mouths were open in wonderment. Mine was too. And Pop and Charlie sort of shrugged at each other as this obviously sincere young man from Massachusetts went to work. When Rocky moved in on the punching bag, he did everything wrong. His stance was poor because he carried his feet too far apart, keeping him off balance most of the time. Instead of keeping his chin tucked in and protected by a shoulder, He boxed with his head up in the air and his chin sticking out. He didn't even know how to throw a straight punch at the bag. He hooked or looped his punches into the punching area, and sometimes he'd miss. Then he'd stumble and stagger, trying to regain his balance. Yet there was something in his manner, call it grim determination if you will, even though that term is overworked, that caught and held our attention. Rocky's face was set in such a hard mask when he worked, and he stalked the target with such intensity that we knew he was a truly fearless man. We also saw that he was exceptionally strong. Those were two important plus factors. After the workout, we told Rocky to go to Mrs. Brown's boarding house near the gym, where Pop housed a large number of his young fighters, and to report back to the CYO at 10 a.m. the next day. Then Dad, little Charlie and I talked over what we had just seen. It didn't stack up favourably for the green lad, but we decided that when he came back the next day, we'd have him putting gloves on and box a few rounds with one of our fighters. Then we'd make up our minds. "Let's put him in with Chansey," Dad suggested. "He ought to give us a good idea of what the kid had." Chansey was Wade Chansey, a tough young prospect in the stable. Both Dad and Charlie were high on Wade, high enough to like his chances of becoming a contender. The next day when we went to the gym, Pete told us Rocky and Ali had been standing outside waiting for him to come and open up. Rocky was already dressed in his boxing gear when we got inside. After some exercises to get him loosened up, Rocky had the gloves put on him by Charlie, who also fitted him with a headgear. Then he told Rocky to get into the ring where Chansey was already waiting. Charlie gave them the signal when the first round started. Rocky walked right into Chansey with his feet wide apart, his head high in the air and his chin sticking out. Every time he swung at Wade, whether it was a jab or a punch, he would be off balance and he'd stumble. Chansey, who had gotten a lot of coaching from us, easily avoided Rocky's crude punching attempts, sliding under them or moving away gracefully. Chansey, in sharp contrast to his lumbering opponent, looked like a gazelle, and I found it hard to concentrate on Rocky. After all, we thought we knew what Wade could do. About a minute after the round began, Chansey decided to take charge. He manoeuvred Rocky against the ropes. All Rocky did when he found himself trapped was put his hands over his head, shielding his face with his arms and elbows, and lean back against the ropes. This left his midsection completely exposed. Chansey eagerly went to work on this inviting target, pounding away at Rocky's stomach with both hands. After 5 or 6 seconds of this, Charlie jumped into the ring and stopped the round. He really bored Rocky out. Meanwhile noting, as Dad and I did, that the boy showed no ill effects from the thunderbolts Chansey had pegged at him. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" little Charlie yelled, standing almost on his tiptoes. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" Rocky was surprised at Charlie's anger. "No, sir," he said politely in that Massachusetts accent. "I was just letting this fellow wear himself out, and then I was going to go to work on him." Charlie turned around and stared at my father in astonishment. He got an astonished look in return. I just stood there, trying to keep from smiling. Charlie turned back to Rocky and said, "Well now, look, that's not very smart. Going around and letting yourself get hit like that. You've got to try to protect yourself at all times. Now, I'm going to start the round again, and this time I want you to get in there and try to punch with Chansey here." Charlie climbed out of the ring and gave the signal. The round began again. This time they met in the centre of the ring, and Rocky started to press Chansey, banging away with those looping punches of his. Suddenly, Rocky uncorked a right hand that caught Chansey flush on the face with a tremendous splat, nearly tearing his head off. Chansey, badly stunned despite the big training gloves and headgears, staggered back. Rocky went after him on those thick legs like a cat. Bam, bam, he blasted Wade with 2 more right hands. Chansey fell back into the ropes. He reeled off of them and tottered around like a Saturday night drunk. Rocky, his lips drawn tight, went after him, but Charlie had jumped into the ring. He threw his arms around Chansey. One more right-hand shot from Rocky, and Wade might have been seriously hurt. After we got Chansey straightened out, we sent both he and Rocky to the showers. I can still remember how excited Ali got. See, Mr. Weill, he said, Rocky can hit like I said. He can really hit. Dad, Charlie and I nodded in agreement and told Ali to go check on Rocky in the dressing room. Then the three of us examined what we had. It was this. We had a fellow who didn't know much about boxing, was too old, too small, but could take a lot of punishment, and who had the most powerful right hand any of us had seen in many years. So, my dad, who had made world champions out of Joey Archibald and Marty Servo, though both were just barely fighters, and who had brought Arturo Godoy from South America for 2 fights with Joe Louis, thought it was worth putting some work in on this newcomer. But it's going to take time, Charlie, he told Goldman, time and a lot of patience. We instructed Charlie that the first thing to teach Rocky was how to stand, then how to hold his hands, throw a jab, a left hook and a right hand. Then last but not least, we told him to teach the boy how to defend himself properly, instead of Rocky's idea of letting this other fellow wear himself out. Rocky had great determination and proved to be a wonderful pupil. Goldman would give Rocky the basic instructions in some phase, then turn him over to Ali. Columbo was the go-between. He'd report to Charlie on the progress. Charlie would check it out by watching Rocky. Marciano was a typical self-made man. He was the first one into the gym every day at 10 a.m. when it opened, and the last one to leave every afternoon at 3. Pete Mello often had to chase him out. Marciano learned his lessons though. He learnt them by doing over and over again what he had been told to do, until he got it as close to what Charlie wanted as possible. Often Dad and I would step in and help with the schooling. It was fascinating to watch the slow but steady development of the boy from a crude, awkward fighter into one with a discernible style. Yet we were nagged by a fear. The thing that worries me, Dad said one day, is whether or not he'll still pack that big wallop in his right hand, now that we've changed him around a little. We had taught Rocky how to stand properly and hold his hands and head. We didn't try to change him too much, but we had to get him away from those bad habits. Now, he held his hands higher, his chin was protected behind his shoulder, and his feet were closer together. After 3 months in the gym, during which all of this had been fitted together patiently for him, it was decided to put Rocky to the real test. I've got him a spot on a card in Providence, Dad said. He'll go against a good local boy up there. Since Rocky comes from Brockton himself, it figures to stir up some interest. Manny Almeida, the Providence promoter and a good friend, matched Rocky with Harry Balizarian, rated a pretty good heavyweight prospect himself. This fight, we hoped, would show us what Rocky had learned in the gym and whether or not he could still fire that big punch out of his new stance and punching techniques. The fight was scheduled for July 12th, 1948, and though it would be Rocky's first for us, it would actually be his second pro start. Some 16 months earlier, in March 1947, he had knocked out Les Epperson in Holyoke, Mass. The end came in the 3rd round. About 2 weeks before the Balizarian fight, we got a phone call from Manny. "Hey Al," he said to my father, "we got to do something about your guy's name. It's too long for me to get on my show cards. Can't we shorten it a little?" Dad said he'd talk it over with Rocky, Charlie and me to see if we could come up with something. Rocky, when he flattened Epperson, had used the name Rocky Mac, so his parents, especially his mother, wouldn't know he had fought as a pro, but he shied away from using it permanently. "I prefer to keep an Italian flavour to it, Mr. Weill," he said. "That way my parents might not mind so much." Then we discovered that the H-E-G in the middle of his name were hardly used when the name was pronounced quickly. By simply deleting those 3 letters and leaving the name Marciano, Rocky had his Italian flavour, and also practically the same sound as his real name. Rocky liked the idea fine. We phoned Manny with our decision, and he said the shortened name would fit easily into the show cards. And that's how this swarthy, muscular young man became known to the world as Rocky Marciano. The fight with Bilzerian did cause quite a bit of interest around Providence, as Dad hoped. Bilzerian had acquired a good reputation. He could punch, was a fair boxer, and had good speed. It shapes up as a fight in which we could measure the progress of our new boy. Well, as it turned out, we never did find out how much Rocky had really learned from those 3 months in the gym, but our fears regarding his right hand were over, executing his punches just about the way we tried to teach him. He went out and flattened Bilzerian in the first round with that big right-hand bomb. "I don't know how far we're all going to go with this boy," I said to little Charlie afterwards. "But if he keeps hitting like that, we may go a pretty good distance." Little Charlie nodded. Rocky smiled. "We'll go all the way to the championship," he promised. So that was part 1 of a 4-part serialization of Marty Weill's recollections of Rocky Marciano. Now, as an introduction to this piece, it was mentioned that this was a great piece of storytelling, and it appears storytelling is being used because there's potentially more fiction than fact. Let's try and break it down a little bit. Now, Marty Weill did not actually become Rocky Marciano's official manager until 4 or 5 fights into Rocky's professional career. The only source I have that shows that Marty Weill was there on the day that Rocky showed up for his tryout in front of Charlie and Al is from Marty himself. And although a lot of what he says is accurate, Rocky did not know the basic rudiments of boxing. He wasn't the absolute novice that he's made out to be. Sure, he didn't know how to throw a left jab. Charlie Goldman reiterated that. He threw it with his palm up. And yes, he did have a tendency to lay back against the ropes and allow his opponent to beat him around the body. In fact, as an amateur, he was accused of playing possum quite a lot and was actually reviled for it. The rope-a-dope, before the rope-a-dope became popular. Also, talking of Rocky's amateur career, Rocky didn't just lose 1 fight as an amateur, he lost at least 3. Of course, the fight against Coley Wallace is the most famous, and it's quite true that it was seen as a poor decision by those in attendance at the time. Coley Wallace had been touted in the press as being the next Golden Gloves champion, so of course he was going to win. Although no illusion is made that they knew about Rocky's previous fight against Les Epperson in 1947, they did not know then that Rocky had one prior fight. It was a fight that wasn't actually added to Rocky's record until 1952, the summer prior to his fight with Harry Matthews, and that Rocky used the name Rocky Mac. Again, in previous videos it's been alluded to that that was a typo, a printing error, rather than a deliberate act on the part of Rocky and Ali Colombo to hide his name. And the name change, Marciano to Marciano. Here it is said that Manny Almeida contacted Al Weill and said the name was too long to go onto a fight card. That's ridiculous. Rocky Marciano was the name that Rocky went by for several of his early professional fights, and it was mangled. Very rarely was his name actually spelt correctly. But it is true that the Heg was taken out and Marciano was used instead, and that Rocky did not want to change his name, but he was content with the Marciano name because it kept the Italian flavour. However, it didn't happen in the first fight. Again, it took 3, 4, 5 fights before the name Marciano was officially adopted, and it was more down to the fact that the fight announcer in Providence at the time was using the name Marciano because it was easier to pronounce, and fight fans in the area were beginning to regard Rocky as Rocky Marciano. So it didn't change for the first fight. And this constant we all the time, we told Charlie Goldman to change his strategy. We helped to do this. No, that didn't happen. Charlie Goldman knew exactly what he had and he knew exactly what to do. He did not need a manager or an erstwhile manager to tell him how to create a fighter. Indeed, Al Weill so trusted Charlie that he very, very rarely got involved in actual training strategy. He knew that Charlie knew exactly what he was doing. So Marty's trying to jump on the bandwagon a bit there and claim that he had a far bigger investment in Rocky Marciano, the embryonic Marciano, than he actually did. And I can't say as I really truly blame him. He was cut out of everything pretty much as soon as Rocky became a bona fide contender. Marty Weill was soon pushed out. And one of the claims at the end there, that after the Belisario fight, that Charlie and Al and Marty all looked at each other and said that we have a champion in the making. Again, no. Charlie Goldman wasn't there, Al Weill wasn't there, and absolutely Marty Weill wasn't there either. Again, Rocky's first 5, 6, 7, 8 fights, Goldman only went to 1, and Al Weill was not there to see any of Rocky's early fights, and certainly Marty wasn't. Marty Weill only really was given the official status as Rocky's manager after his father, Al Weill, was again promoted to matchmaker at Madison Square Garden. So there is a little bit that I could go on, but I don't want to denigrate Marty Weill too much. From everything I've learned about Marty, he was a lovely man, and he did a lot for his community in Ironton. Next time we'll move on to part 2 of I Remember Rocky, and as we move further on in Marty's relationship with Rocky, things will become a little bit more certain, because on these occasions Marty Weill was there. So we'll see you on the next one. Thank you for listening. I really hope you got something out of it.
If you like this content, then hit the subscribe button. To really support this channel, consider joining for just over $1 a month and unlock ad-free members-only content. Every member will play a key part in revealing the real Rocky.
I just enjoyed combat. I just enjoyed the sport that I had learned so well, and I had practiced so much that when the bell rang, I did a job. I could concentrate on the opponent.
It was a great, great career for me. I'm proud and very happy to talk about it. Sometimes I wonder why I was such an aggressive man in the ring.